Hi everyone, Jenna with Man Lake. I'm here with Dr. Juliana Rangel from Texas A&M University. Juliana, can you tell me a little bit about your position with the university?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. My official position is I am professor of apiculture in the Department of Entomology at Texas A&M University, which is located in College Station, about an hour and a half north of Houston.
Tell me a little bit about the research that you're doing there.
Yeah, of course. So I basically run a research program, mostly research and teaching program. So I'm 60% research, 30% teaching, and 10% service. So believe it or not, I have no extension component to my job, although we are
Okay.
just in the finishing um, part of hiring a new extension apiculture um, person who's going to be out of the Overton research facility of Texas A&M University, so actually quite close to here. I would say maybe a couple of hours. But anyway,
Okay.
that's another story.
Yeah.
But for my side, I basically have different lines of research that try to understand how um, biotic and environmental factors affect honeybee health. I started out looking at how pesticides affect queen and drone health, but since then, over the last 10 years, the program has expanded to looking at how pesticides affect nutrition, um, uh, feral bee biology. So we have a population in South Texas that has been unmanaged forever, basically, because it's in a protected land area. And so we study their biology and their population genetics. We've done a lot of work with Varroa destructor and trying to understand its biology and how it makes its decisions on how to parasitize um, larvae or pre-pupae based on how it communicates and interacts with nurse bees, which are the ones
Yep.
that take them to the brood. And we're also now having other projects that are really interesting in Varroa genetics. So Varroa is thought to be very inbred. Well, it is very inbred because of the way that it reproduces inside the hive. But there's a lot of cryptic genetic diversity in the Varroa population that you have to use different genetic tools to try to understand how, whether and how the population of Varroa across different colonies and apiaries varies. And we're collaborating with Frank Reykjavik at the USDA lab in Baton Rouge, who discovered the resistance of mites to amitraz. We're trying to see if certain genetic lines of Varroa are actually more prone to becoming resistant
Okay.
to amitraz. We also do a lot of behavioral studies looking at a behavior that's similar to precocious foraging, and it seems to be caused by general stress, so Varroa mite stress, hot or cold temperature shock, all kinds of developmental stress can cause this behavior, which had not been recorded before. So it's similar to precocious foraging in that the bees leave the hive prematurely. They're only about 4 to 5 days old. At that time, they shouldn't even be close to the
No,
entrance.
absolutely not.
And they walk out of the hive and they look like they're going to take off, but of course they can't fly. They're so young, they drop down and they die afterwards.
Okay.
And so it's a kind of a self-removal behavior of very, very young bees. And it hadn't been documented until my student Jordan discovered it, and that's what she's been looking at. So we have basically, depending on how many students we have projects going on.
It sounds like you're, touching all the big hitters of the challenges that are happening with beekeeping right now. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing honeybees and beekeepers today?
I think the number one problem continues to be Varroa destructor and the viruses that it transmits.
Okay.
And without us getting a hold of how to better control that super damaging parasite, we're just going to continue to play catch up. But other problems are becoming more apparent and more synergistic. Definitely, temperatures in changing temperatures, climate change is going to become a more significant problem because we're seeing it here in Texas. We have very damaging floods,
Yep.
very damaging dearths, where there's just complete drought and no food available.
Mhm.
That's obviously going to change the phenology
Absolutely.
of the plants or the availability of plants at all for bees to consume nutritious food. So I think that's going to continue to play a significant role. We are seeing these dramatic changes in temperature, especially at the break of winter and spring, that you can see where we're at changes of 30 to 40 degrees within one day, and the highs being temperatures at which um, bees are become active,
Mhm.
50 degrees, and there should well, in the past at that time of year you wouldn't see 50-degree days,
Yeah.
and so the bees are just going crazy. They just think, well, it's time to get out there and look for food and do voiding trips and use up all the little energy we have left.
Mhm.
It's honey stored, and then they come back, and of course there's no food outside, but also they used up everything that they had stored
Yeah.
to do those fights. And so that colony mortality during those very striking, fluctuating days of crazy temperatures is just going to continue, I'm afraid. And that's going to take a big hit on our colonies for sure.
So we've been focusing a lot on trying to bring new feeds to the market. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of feeding because of these new environmental stressors?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We happen to have our largest funding source right now is a grant from the USDA that is helping us understand how honeybees regulate their intake of macronutrients, so proteins and lipids. And our research for the last 3 to 4 years has shown that honeybees regulate their intake, of course, in a way that's when they have different diets, which they do because they collect pollen. And I'm talking more about protein and lipid. So the bee bread and pollen they consume, not so much carbohydrates. Um, they seem to be able to regulate their intake of the different complementary diets based on their needs. But most importantly, they're very keen on the lipid fraction of the food. So they try to um, consume a more balanced lipid fraction that has the right ratios of fatty acids.
Okay.
And what I've noticed, or we've noticed in the market, is that um, a lot of these supplementary feeds are not quite mimicking the real preferences of bees, in at least so far as we have noticed in the laboratory, with a little um, with less attention being paid to lipids than I think personally there should be.
I think the focus is generally more on
On
protein.
protein,
Yeah.
correct. But it looks like, based on our research, when we give them diets that vary in the protein to lipid ratio, they prefer a more balanced diet that has a closer lipid amount, closer to the protein amount, than very striking high protein, low lipid diets.
Okay.
And what's exciting about our work, I mean, we're just touching the surface of this, but some studies that we've done in which we have um, uh, given or inoculated bees with either the deformed wing virus or with Nosema ceranae, and we give them these diets that vary in the protein to lipid ratio. Certain ratios actually help them survive the disease better than others.
Okay.
So, what if in the future we could have gotten such a great hold of our understanding of honeybee nutrition that we can give them supplements that have different protein to lipid ratios or different nutrient ratios that can help them combat disease. Specific diseases, maybe one diet in one season when viruses are rampant, and then another type of diet in a different season, for example, in the spring when Nosema numbers go up, and then something different in the fall when Varroa and viruses go up. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for
Mhm.
improving the supplements that are available to bees out in the
Okay.
market.
I would agree. I mean, it's constantly um, something that's in development with our company and other companies is trying to improve feeds, and I think it goes hand in hand with the research that's being done,
Mhm.
because 20 years ago it wasn't there, right?
Right.
So we have to all just work together to continue to learn these things.
And unfortunately, I mean, fortunately for your company, but
Mhm.
unfortunately for beekeepers and bees in general,
Yeah.
because of these crazy weather patterns, they're going to be needing
Mhm.
a lot more supplements and feeds to help their bees in times
Yeah.
of dearth, which are probably going to get, in some parts of the country anyway,
Mhm.
longer
Yeah.
than before.
So let's go back and talk a little bit more about your research. So a lot of your research is funded by grants. I mean, can you tell me a little bit about the funding process for your research?
Yeah, so most of the um, research that we do in our lab is funded through the USDA NIFA, so the National Institutes of Food and Agriculture. Those are the larger grants, 3 to 4 year grants that
Mhm.
fund um, a graduate student and or a postdoc. So right now for the nutrition study, because
Mhm.
it's a large 4 year project, we have just started with a PhD student and a postdoc, and they're both working hand in hand to look at the different types of diets that um, honeybees consume in agricultural versus rural versus urban areas. We're trying
Mhm.
to understand the whole complex system of being a colony in the middle of Houston
Yeah.
compared to a colony that's being put in for almond pollination
Mhm.
in the Central Valley of California. So anyway, those large grants are difficult to get, very difficult to get. They have a funding rate of maybe 5 to 10%. Um, it goes through a very, very difficult, complex peer review process. Um, However many proposals are submitted throughout the country are given to a panel of experts of about 20 people that discuss the merits and the criticisms of each proposal. And your fate is in the hands of the reviewers and of how well of a job you did in explaining what you wanted to do. So
Mhm.
we were very proud of getting that. In the past, I had gotten the same grant, but to look at the effects of agrochemical exposure during development on queens and drones and their reproductive health. Um, then we go for right now, as the project is growing and our reputation is growing. I have 3 different grants with international collaborators. So those are the ones that excite me the most because
Yeah.
it allows us to understand what people are doing in other parts of the world. So we have a large grant with New Zealand, the equivalent of the USDA in New Zealand.
Mhm.
And for all of these, we kind of partner up to mimic each other's work, and we do the same project there and here to see how they differ and how they're similar.
Mhm.
So we have one in New Zealand, we have one in Saudi Arabia,
Okay.
um, and then we have one in Australia. And so those are smaller 1 to 2 year projects. Um, the main collaborator in the respective country is the one that submits the grant, but then we're kind of like a subcontractor, and
Mhm.
if they get granted the big funding, then they give us the subcontract for our part, but it's more like we're collaborators of a larger endeavor. And we have something similar here in the US with Michigan State University with Megan Milbrath. She runs the apiculture program there, and she's kind of the one person running the veterinary medicine slash beekeeping training for
Mhm.
veterinarians in the country. And so we're part of one of her many grants on that. And so we do some trainings in Texas to bee vets. Um, we are part of the development of all of the educational material that's being created for and provided to uh, veterinarians that want to
Mhm.
learn about beekeeping. Um, and so these are smaller subcontracts for us. And then the rest of the funding usually comes from smaller nonprofit organizations like the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign, or NAPC. Um, their grants are usually about $10,000 a year, and they last only for a year. So your idea cannot be, grandiose and take 4 years to develop. It has to be an attainable set of objectives that you could hopefully fulfill within a year, and you
Okay.
have to do a report. So Project APSM is another one. They have slightly larger grants. The Eastern Apiculture Society has a grant program that's actually, a few $1,000s,
Mhm.
but that's actually enough. We're lucky that we do in the lab anything from the molecular work, which is quite expensive because anything genetic is sequencing is expensive, although it's becoming cheaper now,
Mhm.
to behavioral. And so all you need is an observation hive and a student that is willing to do the work and just look at bees perform what they do all day
Mhm.
long. And if we have the students, we capture their interest, then those smaller grants are actually just enough to get us at what we need to find out. And so they've been really important in our grant or funding seeking strategy.
Mhm.
And the good thing about these smaller ones also is that it's a continuation in many cases of a student's own project, and so they become the co PIs, or primary investigators.
Yep.
So even though I'm the one that submits the grant because it has to go through our university,
Mhm.
it's with the understanding that it was co-written by the student. And so when they put it on their CV and they go out and looking for jobs, they can say that, yes, I co-wrote a grant proposal and it was funded. And actually nowadays that's quite important when PhD students are looking for postdocs or other positions. They have to have some experience in grant writing.
Is apiculture and that PhD study area growing, or are you struggling to find grant students to help with these research
Absolutely,
projects?
it's growing.
Yeah.
And I'm also all the time surprised. Like I sit around with my colleagues wondering where all these people are gonna go after they graduate.
Hmm.
What jobs are they gonna get? Because we know that the type of job that I have or that my colleagues have are very few and
Yes.
far between. You basically have to wait until someone retires, and potentially the university is going to reopen the position and not absorb it and take it elsewhere for a
Hmm.
different department. So this type of position that I have is not very common. And although there have been a couple of openings, like new positions being created in some
Hmm.
parts of the country, for instance, the one I was mentioning before,
Yep.
Texas A&M, the Texas Beekeepers Association lobbied for many years to the state legislature until they finally got funding for an extension apiculture position,
Hmm.
and which is going to get started hopefully this year. So there's a few faculty jobs, but so there's a lot of interest in students in pursuing the PhD in entomology. Um, but generally, I think more and more we're noticing that they would rather go into either working for the government, like the USDA
Yep.
or EPA, or industry.
Hmm.
And I don't see anything wrong with that. As long as we have qualified people working in all of the above, that's
Sure.
good enough. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of growing interest in students learning.
Hmm.
Well, they basically have a degree in entomology, so they hopefully they stick to bees. But if need be, they could also work with any other um, pollinator,
Hmm.
or even just eusocial insect if they want to move down that road for their postdoc.
So, what advice would you give to a new college student coming in thinking about going down this path? What advice?
I would say you have to have um, grit.
Hmm.
You have to be a go-getter and very, very interested in working to help bees and understand bee biology, because you're going to have long summers with
Hmm.
hot temperatures, especially if you're in Texas,
Yep.
um, dealing with sometimes obnoxious colonies that won't leave you alone, and they get spicy and it gets frustrating because they can sting you, and so you have to live through the pain and continue to do the work. To this day, I have not had a student that has quit or said, I made the wrong choice. Most of them, though, the ones that I recruit, have had some um, background in beekeeping. So I guess I'm good at recruiting because I make that little first test of whether they have
Yeah.
worked with bees in the first place. But as long as they have the determination and I guess the grades, right, to make it through the program, they will have a career that's fulfilling, and very likely they will find a job, especially nowadays that there's more funding and more interest in apiculture than before.
Yeah. Well, even beekeeping as a hobby can just be so fulfilling. If you were to give advice to somebody thinking about getting into the hobby, what would you tell them?
So every time I get that question from a person that has never kept bees and is just interested in bees, the first thing is you don't really have to own bees right now to be an apprentice. The first thing you should do is read and go to your local beekeeping club meetings for at least a year before you even own your own bees.
I think that's great advice.
Yes, you
It
can
is
go,
great
and
advice.
if you like, here in Texas, we have the Central Texas Beekeepers Association Bee School that always gets between 800 and over 1,200 people. And one of the activities they have is a field activity for any newbie that wants to go and get in the suit and go and look at bees for the first time in their lives, live with a frame.
Yep.
So there's those opportunities. Your own club might have beekeepers that will take you as a pupil or as an apprentice and take you to their bees and do an inspection with you as a mentee without you owning any bees. And I think that a lot of people rush into this hobby because it looks fun for one, and it looks interesting, but they didn't put in the hours of studying that I think should be done before you get into it.
Yeah.
And once you do, once you're ready, once you've read, once you've become a member of your club and attended meetings and asked questions and gone through your mentor's hive inspections for a few times, then I would recommend getting not one, but two, at least two colonies, so that you can increase your odds that they will survive the first winter, which is, I think that's one of the tests for new beekeepers, and a lot of attrition occurs because their one colony died and they feel guilty, they feel really upset, sad. Of course,
Yeah, it can be very discouraging
the
when you
cost
go through all that
associated.
work and the cost, yes, and then to lose your hive.
And then you lose it, and then you only had the one, and so that was it. You had 100% mortality, right?
Yes.
Of your one colony.
Yes.
But if you have two or three, then a few things happen. Well, over winter, you hopefully will have at least one or two that made it. Maybe you got lucky and all three made it. But number two, you get a sense of understanding the different kinds of, let's say, personalities of each colony that come from their different genotypes.
Yeah.
And so you start to understand how different colonies manage resources differently, how they grow differently, how they behave differently. And so you start doing, a lot of comparing and contrasting that help you understand the biology of the bee, which is, to me, as a biologist, the most interesting part of this whole thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But definitely becoming part of a community of mentors and mentees. If you're far from an area that has any club, at least becoming a part of a club remotely now with social media and really good Zoom and webinar series. There's no excuse really now. Even if you don't have a computer on your smartphone, you can log on and watch all these very useful tools. Not to say though that there's a lot of misinformation out there,
That's true. That's true.
especially on YouTube.
Yeah.
And so I would say that's where your interactions with your mentors come into play, because they will tell you who to trust and who to follow, and who probably is someone that's not as
Yeah.
credited with.
Well, and it can just be so different. I mean, a Minnesota beekeeper is not going to be doing the same things that a Texan beekeeper is going to do.
Absolutely. And so one of the things is, with trying to combat pathogens, you may get the advice that comes from a good place, trying to help your bees, but like maybe just try a little bit of increase your dose for such product A or B, or apply it in a way that it's not supposed to be the way. And this is my own little experiment, and they show it on YouTube, and it seems to have worked for one colony. And this happened, I don't know, in North Carolina, and then you come and try it with your very little amount of knowledge in another state, and it failed, of course, and it killed your queen, and it killed your colony. And so you have to be careful with experimenting. I mean, if you're a free agent, you can do whatever you want, but as a new beekeeper, I would say that the more informed you are, and follow the more accredited sources of information, the probably the better you will be over time.
Yep. Do you have anything else you would like to share?
So yeah, I mean, I'm really excited that we have this new extension apiculture person, whoever that will be in the next year, coming to Texas. And so you as in every person in the US for the next 10 years is going to witness what I hope will be immense growth in the amount of research, applied research, and tools for beekeepers than ever before. Because whoever that person ends up being, they're going to run a very, I know for sure, based on the candidates we interviewed, that they're going to be running a very successful extension and research program. And I foresee them collaborating with our program directly in ways that are going to be synergistic, and it's going to greatly, hopefully, improve the health of colonies for not just commercial beekeepers, but sideliners and backyard beekeepers in our state, and hopefully, around us, the states around us. But I'm very, very excited about what's to come in the next 5 to 10 years for our state.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think we probably owe a big thanks to everyone involved with getting that position added.
That's absolutely true. And it's supposed to be earmarked every 2 years. It would have to get renewed, but it looks like that's, for now, it's going to be something that will be in place for the foreseeable future. And so it's just going to be, it's going to magnify the impact of the work that we do in our state to help our beekeepers, for sure.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we know that beekeeping historically has been a male-dominated field, and that seems to be changing. There's a lot more women getting into the hobby and going down career paths like you. So what advice would you have for a young woman thinking about getting into beekeeping or doing their degree in apiculture?
So I am excited about the growing degree of diversity that I see in the beekeeping community in the US. It's very exciting to see a lot more women, young women, even girls attending these meetings. And so there is definitely room for growth in terms of the products that are available to women and the type of programs that are available to women. So I was mentioning to you earlier that there's a program by the USDA called WAMS, which is Women and Minorities in Science, Technology, and Engineering, in which the program funds training for women in different areas of agriculture. And I've been part of that panel a few times, and I've never seen programs directed to beekeeping. And so I think that someone, maybe my program in the future, but someone in the US should apply for that program, because I think it would have a good chance of getting funded and improving the experience of women in beekeeping. Um, we don't have a lot of programs out there that are focused just for female or minorities. So I would like to see not just more women um, and minorities in beekeeping, but also in academia, in the apiculture world. And I'm very proud to say that I run a very diverse laboratory with people from all walks of life and a lot of women and that are now successful scientists at the USDA and different universities. And so I, I'm hopeful for the future of beekeeping for women and minorities. And I'm excited to see what companies like Man Lake might have in the future in terms of apparel and tools that are more tailored to a diverse group of clients that are not just tall men. You
Yes.
know, we need some outfits that are better fitted for a woman's body. And etc. So I'm looking forward to seeing that growth in terms of the products available to women in apiculture.
Just the overall future of the industry.
Yeah, that's true.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for all the research that you're doing. If you guys like this video, like and subscribe and come back for more.